So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to how you got into science fiction and fantasy, because I know your dad is a writer, but what were the kind of books that you were reading when you were growing up?
Well, I think the first book I can remember being read to me by my mom. So my mom was an actor, a very modestly famous one. She did some pretty cool stuff. Anyway, she had a fabulous, what they used to call radio voice. And she read The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings to me when I was like I think it took 3 years. So 5 to 8, 5 to 7, something like that. And that had an enormous impact, like which rolls on to today. I can almost hear my mom in all the voices. Definitely Bilbo, definitely Gollum. Gollum's voice, my mom's version of Gollum's voice is so much better than the Lord of the Rings movies version. Anyway, so that was like my first taste of what books could bring me that wasn't run, stop, run. And then I kind of stopped reading. I did a little reading like most people do. And then I got really into baseball and just lost interest in reading.
Oh, wow.
And so my father, who was really quite the intellectual and was not intending to have an athletic son, we were at a church rummage sale and he offered to buy me a book if I would read it in a week. And the book he chose to buy me was Alexander Dumas' Three Musketeers, which I still believe is one of the greatest novels ever written. And like many young readers, and I still do this, I'm a good fanboy, I've read it 30 times. Like there are whole passages of dialogue in the Three Musketeers that I have memorized in English, and sometimes some bits I can do in French. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that it is the perfect adventure novel. And I could bore you with why I think that. But that's the first book I remember reading like with passion. I read other books that I had to read, but that's the first book that I remember just, taking in, like you and I both want fans to take in our books, where you eat the book alive. And after that, I couldn't be stopped. I just read and read and read. And my mom and dad, my dad had a great agent back in those days named Pat O'Connor. My dad's a writer, if you guys don't know that. And Pat would just send him boxes of other people's books who he repped. And amongst other things, he repped Dorothy Dunnett in North America. And you may not know that name, but she is, in my humble opinion, the greatest historical novelist of all time. And so I got, at age 13, I'm reading Dorothy Dunnett and saying to dad, like, what's a mistress? Like, what role does a mistress play in family life? And I remember asking my dad that in the car, and my dad did a pretty good job, really, all things considered. And that was sort of my stable reading, was historical novels. So Rosemary Sutcliffe and Mary Stuart. And not a lot of people read Mary Stuart anymore, but The Hollow Hills is like Arthurian, but also fantasy. Right. So I loved, it's like historical Arthurian because it's sub-Roman Britain, but Merlin's magic works. And I loved that. I thought that was the greatest thing. But the other thing, and I've sort of been on this theme for the last couple of months whenever people let me talk. Back when I was a teenager, you didn't get to pick and choose subgenres in speculative fiction. My local bookstore had a speculative fiction shelf that was like 3 books by 3 books. I read them all. So I read all of Mercedes Lackey and all of Andrew Norton and all of C.J. Sherry and all of Robert Heinlein and all of Jerry Pournelle, like right-wing hard military science fiction, all the way to Girls with Unicorns. I read it all. Yeah. And frankly, I liked it all. Nobody was telling me that this was girls sci-fi or this was girls fantasy or whatever. And so I've just been on this little soapbox during my 15 minutes of fame saying to people like, I wish people would get out of their comfort zones and just try some other stuff. Yeah. Last year, one of the best books I read was a guy named Chase Bowling. He's an indie author in the States. He's Black. He's passionately Black. And his fantasy isn't necessarily for everyone, but it really shook me, and it was written with passion. And I was like, I would never have read this if this guy hadn't tracked me down on And that has started me back to the life I started in, which is like, I want to read everything. I want to read, you know. So a couple of years ago, one of the best books I read was by Tasha Suri. I do not ordinarily read fantasy without a lot of sword fights, but no, but all of us, but I read it and went, oh, this is like the best book I read this year. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like everybody could just like pop out of grimdark or epic or whatever they think is their thing and go like, sure, I'll reach into the speculative fiction stew and try something completely outside the comfort zone. That's all.
Yeah, because same as me, growing up, I read whatever was available. There wasn't the breadth of science fiction as there is now. And I read everything from Animals of Farthing Wood with talking animal stories, going on adventures, through to Ursula Le Guin, to, you know, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, who until I was 18 thought were two women science fiction and fantasy writers, because there's no men called Tracy in the UK. So for the first 20 years of my life, and someone, you know, Tracy, that man, what do you mean he's a man? Anyway, so I just read whatever was there. And about 10 years ago, when I was doing like book blogs, I'd get arcs, and sometimes you go, oh, I'll just try it, and you read it. And one of my favorite books to this day, I read 10 years ago, I still go on about because nobody knows about it. And it's a post-apocalyptic zombie novel. I don't like zombie novels, just not my cup of tea. I don't really read horror novels too much. Read this book, absolutely loved it, blown away by it. And it was just so outside my usual comfort zone. So yeah, it's that thing of not just picking up the same old and finding something new that sparks new ideas, because that's what we always want, new things to come from new places.
Yeah, I just want to hammer this point home. Maybe my favorite author outside of, say, Tolkien is Ian Banks.
Yeah.
And I only know of Ian Banks' existence because my dad and I were fishing in Scotland, which sounds very posh. Don't imagine posh. Imagine budget everything, but except the fly rods. Fly fishing isn't a class thing in North America. I know it is in the UK. So anyway, we're in Scotland on the island that my family is from, and there's a fabulous bookstore in Tobermory. I mean, fabulous by like modern standards.
Yeah. And
they had every Ian Banks book. Well, we were in Scotland for 13 days. I read one a day.
Wow.
Just powering through. And I was up at 4 to fish with my dad. But my dad can fish forever. I'd get up, fish till the like morning sun was up, and then I'd just sit there and smoke and read Ian Banks. And frankly, it is one of my favorite holidays of all time.
Yeah, for the last 2 years I haven't been able to do it, but we'd go on holiday. I take a stack of books, I lie by a pool, I swim, I chill out, and I read almost a book a day and just go through like 7. And I tackle my to read pile and just every day. So, you know, take 7 books and I read 7 books or 6 books, and it's just my favorite holidays.
See, I shouldn't say this in an interview live on the air, but I took a stack of books, including The Coward, on my vacation. And one of my best friends here in Toronto is a philosopher, and I love philosophy, and he's just written a book, and I promised him I'd get it read. I was on like group family childcare all through vacation because it's an extended family. I don't think I read 500 words, and mostly I went to sleep. Like, sorry, it was. So I failed all of you, but that is what I used to think that that's what vacations were for. Like, as far as I'm concerned, the really good thing about a Kindle is you can take an entire vacation's worth of books in a single object. I like reading. See, I'll give a little plug for Forbidden Planet and your book. I like reading books like this.
It's the artifact. It's the tactileness. It's the smell. Yeah. It's the feel of the paper, and I love.
Yeah, but I also like knowing that this book was at Forbidden Planet at some point, right?
And I signed it.
And you signed it, right? That's all kind of cool. Anyway,
traveled a long way to get there. Yeah. So I was going to mention about this. People who don't know as well, because for years I also thought you were Canadian because you live in Canada.
Well, I am now.
Well, you sound it. That's the thing. You've been there so long, you don't sound like a local. But you served in the American military, in the Navy.
Yeah, many Canadians will remind you that they are also American, so we'll say the United States Navy.
Okay, United States Navy.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'll combine those two and say I once walked into my boss's office in civilian clothes for reasons I won't go into. And he was debriefing another officer who had just done something fancy and who stopped his debrief, looked at me, and I just plopped down like I would because I'd been somewhere. And my boss, who was a Marine colonel, smiles at me and says, "You can go on, son," to the other officer. And he said, "While the NATO officer is here, sir." NATO is code for Canadian or British. And I'm looking around the room. I'm like, "What NATO officer?" And he looks at me, and the colonel shakes his head and says, "He's as American as you are, son." And the guy looks at me because he's from the South and I sound Canadian. I'm from upstate New York, which had the American Revolution gone even very slightly differently. The British won the war in the North in the Revolution. So lots of people, and there were a lot of loyalists. So they kind of expected the Mohawk Valley and North was all going to be part of Canada. Anyway, it isn't, but we speak the same version of English.
Yeah, it's a lot closer. Yeah, I often find myself divided by a common language with some of my American friends. Certain words that don't, and yeah, things that don't make sense. But anyway, so your military history is obviously fed very much into your novels. Can you talk a bit about that? Because there's the obvious stuff, but we can come on to Artifact Space later, but perhaps some of your previous novels.
Sure. So first, a really big picture thing, and I'll be blunt. I was a very different person before I joined the military, and that gave me, I have never ceased, one, thanking the military for the attitude adjustment, but also, and I know that's a very odd thing to say and probably not a popular one, but I will explain in a moment. But second, the realization you can actually change has taught me a lot about writing character arcs that I've never forgotten based on my own character arc.
Right.
I was, some of my friends will now laugh when I say, I used to be quite arrogant. Some of them will go, "Oh, I used to be." But I was the college boy that everybody wants to hate in a military history novel, entering the military. And a lot of really nice people, and I'll use Artifact Space as an example. A lot of the people Marka and Barrow meets are reflections. They're not the same people, but they're reflections of people I met in the Navy who gently but firmly said, "You cannot do that. That is an unacceptable social." And it's actually about social skills. And this is a funny thing, because I don't think most people associate the military with social skills. But I can tell you that living on an aircraft carrier with 6,000 other men with nowhere to go for 6 months at a time is all about social skills. And
yeah,
the more of a dick you are, the harder it's going to be. The more you, and you know, as a culture, we've kind of decided that learning to fit in means some sort of awful surrender and you're not really you anymore. But I learned some very useful lessons about fitting in and about how harmless it actually was, and also about what it's like to live in a trust-based society. And so I'm just going to say this because I write a bunch of different cultures, and I think sometimes people justifiably worry about cultural appropriation. When I wrote the Masters and Mages books, I took big chunks out of medieval Persia and medieval Ottoman Empire on purpose. But one of the reasons I did is that medieval Shia and Sunni Islam are trust-based societies where everything from banking to marriage runs on the assumption the other guy or girl can be trusted. And that makes for a very different feel to society than some thieves' world or New York City, where the assumption is that no one is to be trusted. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And I learned that difference out of the Navy. I went from normal America, where like, yeah, some people trust each other and some people don't. There's race problems and whatever. Aircraft carriers, not necessarily the whole military, but the ship is a trust-based society, and that was remarkable and very eye-opening to me about how efficient trusting everyone is. And like side note, but I lived in Islamic Kenya in Mombasa for a while.
Wow.
And
okay.
One of the things I really noticed about Mombasa is that partially because it's yet another sect of Islam, not the most popular one in the world. It's Aga Khan Islam. also because everyone else in the country is either animist or Christian, and so there's like a colony on the coast. But one of the trustingest trust-based societies I've ever seen, where you walk into a shop, order an expensive piece of silver, and they'll just hand it to you. If you say, I'll pay you tomorrow, even though I'm a white tourist and an American, the assumption is that, no, but I mean, you laugh, but this is, I just found it beautiful. I thought they were in some ways the coolest people I'd ever met in the world because they make it work. And so I know that wasn't about the military, but I was in Mombasa as part of the military. And so that's the other great thing I'll say about the military. I was in the Navy. I went all over the place.
And say, yeah.
So I spent a lot of time in Dubai, back when Dubai was literally Middle Eastern Deadwood. I don't know if you've ever seen the TV series Deadwood, but the big towers weren't built. The souk took up half of what is now downtown Dubai, and it felt like Deadwood. I expected Wild Bill Hickok in a sari to appear, from behind. And I met some characters who I'm still using in books, like men and women from very different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, just trying to make it work or trying to get out of poverty or whatever. And that was super cool. And just a melting pot where you could just meet people from every culture and class in the world. Like, I used to go out and just walk the souk. Have you been in a souk?
No.
It's a Middle Eastern thing. I don't know if they exist in the Far East, but it's like living in a fantasy novel. Maybe I'm too much of a romantic, but there's 8 million little shops, and they stay open past dark. At least they did back then.
Yeah.
And there's a certain fantasy land to the whole thing, and you can buy street food. And some Americans are terrified of eating street food. I'm a street food eater, so I just walk around and buy the stuff and ogle the girls, and I don't know, it was fantastic. So I got to go to Dubai, and I got to go to Africa. I spent a lot of time in Africa. I sort of became an Africa specialist. Other parts of the Middle East, all over the Mediterranean, all the time. Yeah, it was very, very interesting.
It just makes me wonder that, if you'd never joined the military and you'd never traveled around the world and seen all these amazing cultures, what kind of novels would you have written? Would there be, anywhere, like you just said, you've got influences from, Islam and ancient Persia and the Ottoman Empire and all this kind of stuff. And if you hadn't traveled, would they have even, crossed your mind? Would you have even thought to touch on any of those cultures? Or would you have been as accepting as you probably are now without having been, all across the globe?
I'll be honest, I was a conservative Republican when I joined the military, and I was a liberal Democrat when I left.
There's my answer.
And I don't know that I'd ever have written books if I hadn't joined the military, because, and I say this all the time, I apologize because I've said this in every interview in my life, but young people, because I'm older, ask me for advice about writing, and they say, like, what's the most important thing? And my answer is, it's not rocket science. Anyone can write a book, but what really helps is enough life experience to have a story to tell. Yeah. And we may or may not get into this, but it is well known in the passion of writing that I write fast. One of the reasons I write fast is I have stories to tell, and they're like built up like a dam, and I just want to tell the stories. I met some great people who are not normal people. They are like fantasy characters. The Polish ex-prostitute opening her own bar in an Islamic city is not, maybe not TV worthy, but she was freaking fascinating, fast on her feet, and really interesting. And she has populated a number of books in different ways because she told me stories that were too horrible for interview. But see, what I mean is, like, once you've heard some of these stories, you start going like, oh, that's how the underclass actually works. Like leaving out the romanticization of like Marvel comics. Oh, that's, now that I've heard the gut-wrenching version that I will not put in the fantasy novel, I can still enrich, you know what I mean?
I do.
So I'm not a militarist. I'm not even particularly pro-military now, but I won't hide from you that the military probably made me the writer that I am, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, yeah. My background's fairly mixed and complicated as well. And if I'd just been born in England, I don't think I'd be the kind of person that I am today, and therefore not the same kind of writer either. So
Well, why don't you talk a little? Don't make me talk all the time. Tell me a little about that.
Well, my surname is Persian. My dad's
I had guessed.
Yeah, I know you, but most people aren't as wordly or as traveled as you, so they don't work that out. They think it's something else that started in the 1860s. But anyway, yeah. So in Sanskrit, my name means noble.
In Avestan, it means warrior. Aryan.
Yeah, and in India, it means something completely different. It's a designation not of a race, but something to aspire to. It's like when Jewish people say that person's a mensch, he's a good person. It's the same kind of thing as being an Aryan. The Persians used to call themselves Aryans, not because they're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, or 6 foot, dark-haired guy. It's something that you want to become. And so, that fed into me and my dad and his influences. And I've just had a great Persian meal that I've cooked myself for me and my partner for dinner tonight. I absolutely love it, and it's just the smell brings back memories of the country and swimming in the Caspian Sea when I was 5 years old, and the water's so salty that you just bob to the surface. And it didn't have the same kind of pollution that it did now. This is, 35 years ago, more, or probably more. And just things like that stay in your memory for so long. The memories are so bright and so crisp and so powerful. Like, the first time you read Three Musketeers, everyone who's looked at any of your books can see that's had some kind of an influence on you. Swords and, great guys and warriors and all this kind of stuff, it's there. But there's things that just filter in and stay there. And yeah.
Stephen, I'm curious, you've never been in a souk?
So I've been to bazaars. I've been to late night bazaars, but
it's the same. Souk is just the Arabic word. I didn't mean to offend your Persian sensibilities.
I don't know any Arabic, and my Persian is limited to kind of swear words and various animals that my dad taught me whilst trying to teach me Persian.
but you know what I mean. There's like the bazaar, the night bazaar, the women's bazaar, like the women's souk, which you can go into as a man as long as everyone's agreeable to that. I've been in a couple of women's souks, and I love all that.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't feel like a real world when you go in. It just feels so. It's hard to explain to some people. Like you can go to Egypt and you can walk around the bazaar and you can haggle with someone, but that's not the same. And it's very touristy, and it's very kind of, you can't get some things unless you live in a place or you know the locals to take you off the track. Well, this is totally off topic, but I've years and years ago, I visited a friend in New York, and she said, okay, meet me at this location. We'll go and have some beers and play pool. And I said, okay. And I got to this really rundown, dodgy bar. I was really worried. I thought I'm going to get mugged or stabbed. And I went in, and it was proper sawdust and kind of shit on the floor bar. Everyone was lovely. Pool tables in the back, pitchers of Bass beer. Best night of my life. Walked around, went outside and had street falafel. And I would never have got that experience if I'd checked into a hotel and let's go and see the two towers and let's go and do this and let's go and do that. And it, you don't get that, which is why, as you say, travel is so important for widening the mind and helping you with, being a writer. Anyway, that's me talking too much now. Me talking way too much. So, go on.
No, I was going to tell a story, but I'll just eat up our hour. Just in Dubai, and remember, this is not the glorious modern city of modern Dubai. I walked into a shop off the souk because it had been recommended by somebody I'd met in a bar. In those days, there were bars. There was one bar, I think, called the Highlander, and it was all expats and Pakistani doctors. That was the the crowd. And anyway, somebody told me they had old stuff, and I love antiques, and Dubai was not a place to find antiques. So I went in and I was prowling around. It was mostly junk. And they had some coins. And this guy came in, and you could smell the camel and horse on him, as soon as he came in. and he only spoke Arabic. He was wrapped to the eyes. I don't know if he was really Bedouin or just lived out in the desert, but his sword blade was broken. Stephen, this is the real world. And he bought another sword off the wall. And he walked out again. And all of this happened in maybe a minute. And the whole transaction was conducted in Arabic with some bickering. And he paid in silver coins. And I felt like I had just been in someone else as a bit player in somebody else's fantasy novel. It's just the most amazing. Like, I wanted to run out into the street and see if he rode away on a white stallion. It was like that, you know, like somewhere in the fight scene, he broke his sword.
Yeah, I'd be like, how did you break your sword? What were you fighting? Was it more than one man? Was it a beast? What were you doing? Tell me. I need to know.
That's, I don't know. Those are the adventures that are worth anything to run across. And I didn't do anything. He just walked in and bought it. Sword. Yeah. I noticed the sword on the wall. I do this. I was circling towards the sword, trying not to make a beeline, which would tell the guy behind the counter that I was a punter and would pay max price. I never got to the sword. The sword vanished. Anyway.
Yeah. It's always fascinating.
I did buy one of the silver coins. It was a Mary Teresa taler. They got counterfeited all through the 19th century for Arab trade. So they're not actually from 1757. Almost all of them say like 1757 on them. But it was a nice silver coin. I've still got it. Anyway, yes.
Travel really broadens the mind.
Exactly. Especially traveling a long way outside your comfort zone, like the book thing. Okay, good. Yes. We're on a theme.
Definitely. So at this point, you've written like over 40 novels. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Artifact Space and Hawkwood's Sword bring me to 43 that are out.
And you've been writing full time since like 2000.
Yes, I officially left the US Navy in early 2000, and okay. I immediately became a full-time writer. I almost immediately became an unemployed full-time writer, to be honest. But
yeah,
it worked out in the end. It wasn't pretty for a couple of years. See, this event happened early in my writing career called 9/11. And 9/11 pretty much killed the military thriller because Jack Ryan didn't save us. You know, like it turned out that Al-Qaeda was pretty smart and knew what they were doing. And the CIA and FBI didn't, and MI5 didn't jump out of buildings and save everyone. And that was a wake-up call to a lot of folks. But I wrote pretty much like military espionage thrillers, which was very financially remunerative, let me add, until 9/11, and then that whole world died. Boom. And I had to start all over again. So I assumed my writing career was over, which was super cool because I'd moved to another country and given up my military career and stuff. And what I thought was that my one area of knowledge and expertise, writing espionage, was gone. And so now I need a new job. So I thought, am I boring? Is this what you want me to
tell me.
I thought I'd be a high school teacher and teach classics because I love classics, and I took a lot of Latin and classical history in university. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go back and get another degree in ancient Greek.
Okay.
A skill that almost no one has. No. And then I'll find some private high school where the Toffs are taught classics.
Yeah.
And and that'll be my second career. It'll be fine. So I was in class for 3 days, and you have to imagine I'm 45 and everybody else in class is 19. So it's super fun. I could tell you stories, but like the third day in class, the prof, who was an ancient Oxfordian, right, of the tweed suit, spots of egg on his tie variety. And he really was actually a fabulous teacher. Took me aside and said, "You like Xenophon? No, you will. He'll suit you, and he's simple." Which implied that I was simple, but that was fine. So he gave me Xenophon's cavalry commander. And I've been doing classical Greek at this point for 3 days. So I riffled through cavalry commander in English because it was facing page English in one night, going like, wow, I had no idea that there was an ancient military writer who'd actually done it. Not just writing some, like armchair general.
Yeah.
And I was hooked. And eventually I read it all in Greek. And like right then in my head, on day one, I started writing Tyrant in my head, which was my first hit book. And yeah, it was kind of like Artifact Space, actually. It was kind of like, I'm 5 pages into reading Cavalry Commander by Xenophon, and I'm like, I've got it all. I've got a historical novel. And I riffled through, I think Amazon didn't look like anybody was writing about ancient Greece except Stephen Pressfield, who's awesome. And I was like, cool. So I can have this whole historical genre to myself. Maybe someone will buy it, I thought. I never did end up as a teacher.
No, that's well. It's worked out that way. You're still writing. So I'm always curious about this because you've been doing it so long, and other writers. Are you constantly assessing yourself? Are you like aware of where you've improved? I mean, do you even have time to do that, or is it just you've got to make the donuts to get out there to pay the bills? I know people romanticize writers just lying on a chaise lounge, and when the muse strikes them, they write a few words. Well, the reality is you've got to write the books to get them out.
That sounds like a really great life. And if you ever get there, you tell me all about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a very hard question, Stephen. And I'll do my best to answer it honestly, because there's a pat answer that's kind of honest, but I'll give you the full answer. It's like, first of all, I would like every book to be better. And I do write sometimes for free. Like I have free stuff on my website and stuff. And those are sandbox books where I'm testing something.
Right.
So they're all gone now, but on my old website, I had a bunch of gaming related like short stories. And I was actually testing the horror genre.
Right.
And also testing comedy. Like, oh, this is how you, so it was literally like sandboxing a computer program.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to charge people money for that. If they like it, great. And so that does kind of work for me. I do strive to get better. And I'm not ashamed to say I pay careful attention to what I like in other people's books.
Absolutely.
If I love what you do, I'm not saying I'll copy it, but I will examine and like forensically dissect what you did that turned me on.
100%. Yeah.
So like 3 years ago, I read maybe the best set of 4 novels I've ever read in my life. They're not fantasy or science fiction. Mainstream literature, Ferrante's Neapolitan Quartet, they were like the #1 bestsellers in the New York Times for a year. But for a reason. They're like the best series of novels I've ever read. There's not a single sword fight. It's just about 2 young women growing up in the grinding poverty of 1950s and 60s Naples. Mm-hmm. And I learned a ton. And I think I have fan response saying like, your books are noticeably better. So there you go. And, sometimes it's writing that improves, but also I'm going to go back to that life experience and stuff, and I will throw this back at you. But my experience is that sometimes what improves is my ability to observe, because ultimately it's our experience we're selling to our readers, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes what's happened is I've gotten better at seeing what's going on. And that can be brought to me by a book, or it could be brought to me by an experience that is sufficiently, I will hesitantly use the word profound. I'm not quite sure I know what profound means, but it's serious enough or impactful enough or profound enough that I walk away from it going like, wow, I'd never noticed what color roses really are before this moment. And now that I have, I'm going to write about it.
Yeah. And
often this will happen like camping or when I have real time to reflect. But I won't hide from you that also it happens in martial arts. And then I get better, I think, at writing fighting scenes, because I've noticed, for instance, here's the latest thing I've noticed. Ready?
Okay.
I've noticed that even highly trained fighters can't really stand in and exchange blows longer than a certain amount of time, and it's not very much time. It's like 3, 4, maybe 5 tempos. So it's as if the two people come together and their swords go clash, 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 and that's the end. They both back away. Why is that? That's because I think that's all the human brain can take. You're still alive. It was all terrifying. Let's not hide that, even if you're highly skilled. And also, a skilled swordsman knows that the deeper you get into that well of complexity of multiple cuts, the more in danger you are, even from a beginner, because you're no longer tracking on all kinds of things, and your original plan must be out the window by now, and your brain just wants you to get out. And I don't think it's a conscious decision to step back, but you step back. And at one level, I kind of had known this before, but now I realize how important that is to writing. And it's actually kind of useful because you want to punctuate fight scenes with thought, right? Or I do. And knowing that people break apart gives you the opportunity for everything from internal reaction to maybe even dialogue. Super fun. So that, I hope, will make me a better writer.
Yeah, I know some writers don't like to read within the genre that they're working on, but I always do for the same reasons that you said. I can read someone else's book and go, oh, I like the way that person's done that. And I don't say I'm going to steal that, but I'll dig into it and say, well, why do I like that? And can I use that in some way? How can I adapt my own to include elements of that? So I'm not copying. I'm trying to improve myself by seeing how someone else has mastered a certain thing. Like, can I improve my fight scenes? Okay, how they've done it? Is it that they talk more about this or the moves, or what, what is it that they do?
My dad used to compare writing. He saw himself as an artist to painting, which he also did with enormous competency, and say, painters, visual artists train themselves by copying other art. That's how they learn to accurately represent, and how to do that color shade from that yellow to that black and other things is by looking at how another artist did it. I think that's all legit. I will say, though, you just said an interesting thing. When I'm in full novel, when I'm like all about the novels, I'm very careful what I read, because other people's style can flow through me. I don't know why. Maybe I'm a natural mimic, but people I love, suddenly I try to turn into them. It's not that good. There's a historical writer named Patrick O'Brien, who I think is fabulous. He's been dead a few years. And if I make the mistake of rereading a Patrick O'Brien novel while I'm writing historical fiction, I just sound like bad Patrick O'Brien. It's terrible. So I do have to be a little careful.
Yeah. So let's talk about the new novel. Keep an eye on the time. So my question, someone else asked this as well, is why was it now was the right time to write a science fiction novel? What made you think? Because I know you've talked about the idea popped into your head after you've been watching Little Women, I think it was, and then you said, oh, right, that's it, I've got the story. But why did you make it a science fiction novel? I'm curious about that.
So two things. Well, I'm going to go all the way back to your first question and say, so when I started reading, almost immediately I was reading science fiction.
Yeah.
One of my literal earliest memories is watching Star Trek with my parents. So I was always like, that's Gen 1. I'm pretty sure it was the pilot episode.
Wow. Okay.
That nobody even remembers. And my dad was a former Navy officer, so the whole Star Trek thing worked for my dad. Anyway, always loved sci-fi. I unashamedly love Robert Heinlein. I recognize that he's problematic now, and I don't want to be problematic, but he did a lot for the genre. But the person I really love and seek to emulate is C.J. Sherry. Merchanter's Luck, Down Below Station. These were fabulous books. They're still fabulous. In fact, interestingly, while Heinlein has aged, I find that Sherry novels are still like, maybe feminism is still a good idea. No, anyway, that.
But radical.
I loved those books. I think I read Down Below Station when I was 15, 16. Anyway, and I just reread them all about 2 years ago. And I think that's where it started. I knew that I had never finished the Pride of Chanur series. It just didn't do as much for me, which is hilarious because on the reread, I discovered that it's a giant feminist allegory, which 15-year-old Christian had missed completely. And I'm laughing my ass off at 15-year-old Christian. I'm like, wow, you were a dumb teenager. That's amazing. But you know, the men are only for sex and they're not really good at anything, but they're really beautiful to have around, and you can't have them on ships because they're too dangerous, because all the women do nothing but compete for them. So it's best to keep them at home. Oh yeah, that's allegory.
Oh, wait.
Anyway, when I was done with those, I was like, well, I want to read more CJ Sherry. And I ended up in like a 6-month reread of all of CJ Sherry. And that may have had something to do with the decision to write a science fiction novel. But I'll also tell the following story quickly. 3-4 years ago, I was at Gollancz Fest. And Alistair Reynolds, who I worship like unto being a god, Revelation Space, one of the best books I've ever read, was there. And I squeed and fanboyed all over him. There are many things I'm afraid of, but being a social failure is not one of them. So there was a seat empty next to him, and I just plopped into it and demanded that he talk to me, which was perhaps rude. I can think of ways in which I might now play this differently, but I didn't. I was relatively new to being a writer then, or a speculative fiction writer. So it turns out he's a huge fan is the wrong word, follower of American nuclear aircraft carriers. He just finds them fascinating. He's built models of them. So he like pumped me for information. And at some point he said something to the effect of, I don't want to be sued, but something like, I've always assumed that, you know, your giant aircraft carriers were the closest to big spaceships. And I said, oh, I could totally write an aircraft carrier novel. And Jill Redfern was sitting behind me and she said, I'll buy it. You know, you and I are both professional writers, right? And when your editor says, I'll buy it, I mean, this is how I make my living. I immediately go, oh, okay. I had other things on the go. I had just started writing Masters in Mages. I had a lot of stuff going down. But when Artifact Space finally came to me, and it's much more than, I actually mildly resent it being called military science fiction because I don't think it is. I didn't mean it to be military. But, and I'd be interested if you see it as a military book. But anyway, when the idea came to me, I was already deep in writing Against All Gods, which is my next fantasy novel. And I really didn't need to write another novel last year. I was already committed to writing 4, but I literally couldn't stop it. It was like my brain was full. And I remember 2 days struggling to write Against All Gods while this novel like whammed off the inside of my head. And then the 3rd day, I'm like, I'll just write the first 1,000 words to relieve the, no, I've done this before successfully. I'll relieve the pressure.
Yeah.
And then I'll go back to, no, 125,000 words later, I stopped writing, but that's because I was done.
Wow. Okay. So one of the questions we had was, which was the most interesting or challenging character to write in Artifact Space?
Yeah. So Marka and Barrow is not me. That's not to say that any of my fantasy characters are me. And again, I'd love to be on a panel about this. Of course, at some level, all our characters are us.
Yes.
As we're the only people we know. But she's really a compendium of women I knew in the military and women I know in civilian life. And I sort of stacked them together. And I did call a couple of people and ask some hard questions about some stuff that I wanted to make sure was right and appropriately a woman's point of view. And I've never written a female protagonist before, and yet I'm going to ruin this interview by saying that wasn't the hardest character. The hardest character to write was Dorcas. And that's because I did not want the male love interest to overshadow the female protagonist. Yep. But I am male. And also I deliberately wrote him to be on the spectrum and odd. Odd in a way that kept people from really liking him or bonding with him as a character. Totally done deliberately.
Right.
Like sometimes he's funny, He's extremely arrogant, sometimes for reasons. And so to make him, I was digging into like my own bit of being on the spectrum, which I definitely have, and my own ability to fail on social skills and tell a story for far too long, and my own need to tell you how everything in the universe works. And these aren't my best features. So it's, you know what I mean? Like writing, if he was the bad guy, it would have been fun to caricature all my own failings. But he wasn't the bad guy. And so I was trying to make him kind of lovable, but very difficult. And I don't know if I succeeded at that, but he was a very hard character to write.
Okay. Someone else asked, how many books are in the new series?
Yep. Definitely one.
Okay.
I only, no, I'll say this is not a secret. I only had a contract for one book.
Oh, okay.
So, when the sales are decided, they can decide whether they want to buy. So I really wrote it to be 2 books, but I admit I told my editor it was going to be a standalone. And to me, it has a satisfying classic sci-fi ending.
Right.
Again, I'd be happy to hear your point of view. But I wanted to write it as 2 books. But I will now confess that I am so in love with the world building I've done. Am I arrogant? Is this vain? I apologize. But I would like to write a bunch of them. And I'd like to write a bunch of them, including novels that aren't Marca and Barrow. Like, I've had like 30 ideas in this universe. And maybe it's because I'm a CJ Sherry novel fan. Because, you know, she has I think the largest extended universe of any speculative fiction writer. I think she's got 35 books all in the same universe. Okay, I'm not aiming for that, but I have definitely thought of 3 Marca and Barrow novels and then 2 standalone, same universe, completely different plot lines. And then the other day while I was on a long run with my daughter, I suddenly went like, ooh, I want to do an agriculturalist novel, a sci-fi agriculturalist novel. Mostly because it's never been done, but I thought of a great like genetic manipulation plot where nobody ever goes into space. But I'm like, oh, I've got an agricultural planet in Sahel, and it could also be about trying to save the elephant population. And I spent time with the Kenya Wildlife Service in Africa, and I'm like, I could write all that. This is a good book. Like, oh, that's a good idea. Anyway, so I'd really like to be allowed to write 3, but if it doesn't sell, it's the only one there will ever be.
Okay, I'm about 200 pages in now, so I'll let you know how I get on with it. But like you, I came up with the idea for a sci-fi thing, and me and a friend co-wrote a science fiction novel. And then based on that, we've already come up with about 8 ideas. And we're like, oh yeah, but we've got to do this one. Let's get the one, and then we see how the one does, and then we'll go on from there, you know. But
and what makes you, I mean, I think of you as a fantasy writer. What made you want to write science fiction? Come on, you asked me.
Same as you. From one of my earliest things is being allowed to not eat at the dinner table so I could watch Star Trek. And you know, Doctor Who and Babylon 5 owned my life.
Babylon 5, the unsung hero of
it's my, I think it is still my favorite science fiction novel, a series of all time. And you know, JMS is just an absolute idol of mine, hence why one of my books is dedicated to him for all the stories. And yeah, so I've been like you, I've had ideas for science fiction for years and years and years, and nothing clicked until I pitched something to a friend. Oh, that sounds good. And then it stayed in his brain and ping-ponged around, and he was like, oh God, but I'm doing something else and you're doing something else. And I was like, yeah, we haven't got time to do a whole novel. How about we do half a novel each? So we co-wrote it.
I probably am not supposed to say this out loud, but Sebastian de Castel and I have an idea like that. We've been batting back and forth for like 6 months. And it's like, I think we have to do it in the end, because we've now gotten so far down in the design phase that it's like,
you've got to, at some point you're like, oh, but then we could do this. No, finish the first one, and then we go and do the other. then I could do the agricultural novel. Yes, do the first one.
Yes.
So writing fighting, for those who don't know, as your sort of video things that you've been doing on Twitter, actually. Are you going to stockpile them and then do like a YouTube channel all about, you know, writing fighting?
So I have a YouTube channel and they're all there.
Oh, brilliant.
I think I have 18 followers. You know, I chose Twitter. like I am a modestly competent social media manipulator. I chose Twitter deliberately because there wasn't a lot of video on Twitter. And also because Twitter's max content for video is 2 minutes, 20 seconds. And curiously, my two good friends who are professional educators, COVID put a heavy pressure on video education, right? And so I was in a lot of coffee table conversations on Zoom about online education. And I don't think it's a secret that I teach sword fighting. Anyway, I'm on a committee of sword fighter teachers. I could use jargon, but why bother? Okay. And we have been looking at teaching online, and our professional educator friends, one of whom does this for the province of Quebec, and one of whom does it for Nashville, Tennessee public schools, both said 2 minutes is about as much video as people will actually learn from. You need to fit your lesson into 2 minutes. And if it's too complicated for 2 minutes, break it into and make two.
Wow.
And that's funny because I had made sword videos before, or fighting videos, and they were all like 35 minutes long, because that's how long it would take me to fully explain anything. Nobody ever watched those. They get like 31 hits on YouTube. Whereas writing fighting in that short format and on Twitter has been amazing. I mean, really, I hate to say this, but it's raised my prominence far more than my books ever did. I think there are probably more people who recognize writing fighting than Red Knight or Masters and Mages or Artifact Space, which is bizarre. Like, also, it's a ton of work. So I'm about to make writing camping. Right. Actually, I'll probably make the first episode tomorrow.
Okay.
I'll be honest. This is not arrogance. It's just life experience. I have a lot of experience wilderness camping.
Yeah.
It is quite clear to me that many fantasy writers don't. And I mean this with love. I just want to go like, this is how you start a fire. This is how you use an axe. This is how you pick a campsite. This is how you get water and keep it clean. Like, and these are things that were the same in the Middle Ages and really in ancient Greece. I just want to get that out there for the benefit of everyone.
It's true. I don't have that knowledge. I don't have the experience. I wrote about blacksmiths for years and making swords, and I thought I knew because I'd done all my research. And then I went to make a sword for a day. After the blacksmiths had stopped laughing at me, I then spent a day making a sort of sword. And I came away going, oh God, right, I've got to do better in the future now. Until I'd done it, I had no idea. It's reading about it wasn't enough. So,
well, I'm a method writer, and that doesn't mean I'm right. And I was on a pretty good panel at British Fantasy Con where a whole bunch of people basically said, I don't need to know anything about sword fighting to write a fight scene. And that's actually completely valid. And in fact, I have read some very good fight scenes written, because like a good sex scene, it's about character, right? So it doesn't need to be like how this happened and how that happened. On the other hand, there are some tropes in fight scenes and in camping or wilderness scenes that literally snap me out of suspension of disbelief, and I'm lost, wallowing around going like, shall I continue reading this? And some very good writers do it. And I roll my eyes and go, couldn't we not all just agree not to do this? Anyway, but also, to be fair, one of my favorite 1-star reviews of all time is somebody who wrote of the Red Knight. I play World of Warcraft, and I know a lot more about how fighting in armor works than you do.
Brilliant.
But come on, in a weird way, that is his valid experience of fighting in armor, right? Yeah. And it didn't line up with my valid experience. And that,
well, it's like the 15-year-old girl who wrote a review, 1-star review of Anne Rice, saying, Interview the Vampire was appalling. None of the vampires sparkled. So, I just thought, okay, that's your life experience. And then there's everybody else. But, there you go. So Jonathan French has asked, have you ever done the Camino de Santiago, Way of St. James in full period gear And if not, are there any plans to do so? And can he come with you?
So curiously, number one, yes, I have.
Wow. Okay.
So in 2018, with 7 other friends in Medieval Kit, we went from Oviedo on the Primitivo, the Camino de Santiago Primitivo, over the mountains. So it's kind of the hard way. I think we walked about 485 kilometers.
Wow.
It is the most authentic. So I was just talking about wilderness experience, but here's a thing that nobody wants to know about the European Middle Ages. No one went in the wilderness. Holy crap. Like, it's very Tolkien-esque. You know, you're walking through Mirkwood with your dwarves and stuff like that. That's all super cool, but no one did that. Like, and there wasn't a lot of pure wilderness. There's definitely woods at the edge of town, but you walk to the next town and you like rent a sack of straw and sleep on it. And that's what the Camino is. And it's fabulous because, at least on the Primitivo, we were walking through almost primal wilderness all day, but always sleeping in an albergue, in an inn. And some of them were so incredibly medieval. And I mean, genuinely, like the best one I think we stayed in Beldicero was 1410, built in 1410 in little tiny rooms because they had been monk cells. Yeah, it was great. And we did it all in medieval clothes. And I will tell one fast story, which is the first day we were on the full day we were walking, a very nice German woman nonetheless mocked us for our medieval footwear, which is basically like one layer of leather between you and the road. And she had fabulous German hiking boots. So 5 days later, when we repaired her hiking boots with our leather, because when you wear medieval kit, you carry a sewing kit all the time. You just repair your clothes as you go. And when you blow a hole in the bottom of your shoe, you take a piece of leather and sew it on. And we ended up fixing her shoes twice. We didn't say anything revengeful or anything.
No.
We just thought stuff. So so that was super fun. And then the second half of my answer for John is, yeah, we're going next year. Probably going in May. And if you're really interested, I'll tell you what you need. And you're probably welcome to come along with us as long as you don't have some sort of criminal record.
Wow. Okay. That's between him and the police.
But it is great fun. It is also very hard. It's very spiritual. I happen to actually be religious. So I have a, sort of religious commitment to the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But even without religion, I would say half the people I met on Camino had no particular faith. And there were also like more than a dozen Islamic people and a number of Jews and a number of other people. It's spiritual, however you hit it. Somewhere around kilometer 35.
Yeah, you feel something.
You feel something.
Yeah. JC Duncan asks, what will be next year's beard of choice? And do you plan them in advance?
No, I don't. I've never been happy with what my face looks like everyone on the planet. So I was originally, I have an answer for everything. I was growing my beard long because we were supposed to be doing the 2500th anniversary of Platea this year. And it would be ridiculous for me to have a short beard as a 57-year-old man. That's just not on. And I don't want to go as a Spartan E4 and not be in armor. So sorry, I do ancient Greek reenacting. Do you know that? If you didn't know that before, there it is.
I didn't. I do now.
Then when it was clear that COVID had killed doing the reenactment, I cut my beard shorter, which is better for medieval. And I'm about to go camping in my medieval kit, so that's how it is. And it may be gone after Trek, but we'll talk about it. I do want to say another thing in response to you. I'm going all the way back to Babylon 5. So I write ancient Greek historical novels, and at the beginning of books 2 through 6 of my my ancient Greek historical novels, I have a complete homage to Babylon 5 because each one begins basically, it was the year of the Great War.
Well, here's the Easter egg for you and for people who probably don't even notice. My first trilogy is called The Age of Darkness, and the second one's called The Age of Dread. And in Babylon 5, it's all about the different ages. It was the fourth age of mankind, 10 years
Yes.
after the Earth Membari.
God, it always made my blood chill to hear that.
This best introduction is still the first one. It just is. Michael Hare's voiceover is still the best one. I don't know why, but hearing him say it and then finding years out afterwards the story about his life and everything he went through changed.
Yep.
It makes me cry, but it's so much more powerful now. But anyway, Aaron asked, will there be any new stories set in the Traitor Sun universe?
Yeah, so first of all, I will write a Christmas story this year. I intended to write a Christmas story every year, and then COVID-19 happened, but there will be a Christmas story this year, and I plan to just keep doing Christmas stories in the Traitor Sun universe until I eventually choose to write another trilogy, which I'm pretty sure I would sell, so I'm not very worried about that. But like for now, you get Christmas stories. But I will take this opportunity to plug that next year we will get the 10th anniversary edition of The Red Knight, and it will have, I think, 6,800 new words, including a new battle scene that is referred to but hadn't been written out, and a whole bunch of character about Blanche and Desiderata that should have been in the first book and sort of ended up on the cutting room floor. And I was delighted to put it all back in.
Okay. Do you have a release date for the 10th anniversary yet? Someone else?
No, but I did just do the send back on the copy edit. So it's got to be pretty far along.
Okay. Someone else asked, have you ever forgot that you were wearing a sword or dagger and walked down the street and popped to a store in Toronto?
Yes and no. I've never really expected to be arrested. So every year that it's not COVID, we do a thing called Deed of Alms, where we get a bunch of people in armor and out of armor together in Trinity Bellwood, the local park, and we have a big tournament. We don't even keep score. It's just to fundraise, and we give all the money to a homeless charity. So Deed of Alms, sometimes known as hashtag social justice warriors. We can mock you guys right back. Anyway, that's the right wing I'm mocking. Anyway, so last year, 2 years ago, God, what happened? COVID-19.
2 years ago. Must be
2 years ago. I forgot that I didn't completely forget, but I was in full armor with a sword, and I realized that no one had picked up the lunch pizza. So I just walked out of the park to the pizza place, and I knew I was in armor, don't get me wrong, but I didn't think clearly what. Anyway, people just moved out of my way. It was the most remarkable thing. And Torontonians are like Londoners or New Yorkers. There's a sort of like too weird, not really
whatever. Just like some kind of actor, some film set or
exactly
something.
Somebody's filming.
Ron, go on. Ron Smith said, would you ever consider teaching a class on writing fiction?
Yeah, no. I'll tell you why, and I respect. I'm flattered that Ron thinks so, but I'm not positive anyone can teach you to write fiction. I'm going to go back to my comment earlier about life experience. Like, my class would be sort of like, you in the front row. What have you ever done in your life? Have you ever kissed a girl? How about a boy? Would you like to compare those two experiences? Write me an essay. See you Tuesday. You in the next row. Like, seriously, like
it'd be unique style. Certainly would generate interesting conversations, though.
It would be very Socratic. It would be very like, how do you think you should write a fight scene? Have you ever been in a fight? And honestly, I was on a panel, and that was my first question for everybody on the panel, everybody in the room. Like, have you ever been in a fight? Lots of people have it. I'm like, well, it really helps to write a fight scene if you've actually been in a fight. Because one of the things then about the fight is that you know very little about what happened. Yeah. And an incredibly small part of it was planned. And there's like this mixture of terror and like, whatever, my body is functioning. What the hell is going on? Especially if you take a punch and like it hurts. Anyway, and then several people had, and I'm like, okay, what's your experience of being in a fight? How would you translate that into writing about a fight? See, no sword involved. You don't have to be a fencing master. Just like translate your experience. There it is, my class, done.
There you go. Job done. Okay. David Walters wants to know, does Sebastian de Castel ever stop ribbing you? Is it a prerequisite that every time you come into contact with each other, you're constantly making fun of each other?
No, I never make fun of Sebastian. He only makes fun of me. That's just that's our relationship.
Okay.
He alternates harsh, sarcastic teasing with obsequious flattery, and I just take it. That's really unfair, by the way, the thing I just said, but I'm just going to leave it there.
That's fine.
I'm hoping that he hears it.
People will be like, okay, we'll just take that. They'll take it as read. The last question someone said was, inspired by the coward, what's the biggest animal you think you could take down with a sword?
Yeah, so the historian in me, both the historical martial artist and the straight up historian, says wild boar, because people did. So there are special boar swords, and they kind of look like swords. They look like swords with two hilts, one way out front. Because when you stab a large animal with anything, you want it to stay 5 feet away from you. Like, yes. I want you to just imagine whatever it is. Let's call it a wyvern. So you're fighting a wyvern. When you stab the wyvern, you want the reach of its claws to still be too far from you to get you. Mm-hmm. Yes, this is an important thing that we can learn from medieval hunting. And one of the most pivotal experiences of my life, I love this like full circle thing, brought to me by the military because I was working with the Kenya Wildlife Service, was being charged by a rhino. And I hadn't done anything to the rhino. The escort I was with made a lot of noise, and the rhino didn't like us. And rhinos are nearly blind. So when they charge you, they're not really charging you. I didn't know this. I guess you could get trampled by a rhino, but that's not what really happens. They just pass within 20 feet of you. But as they come at you, they go like, oh, humans, and they run away. So after I cleaned myself up, every word I've ever written about fighting monsters and large animals is based on being charged by a rhino, because my only thought was, and now I die. And I actually had enough time to go like, no matter what weapon I had, I'm going to die now. It would not matter. There is no weapon that will get me through the charging rhino. Like full plate armor with like a boar spear, I take longer to die. Like you're not going to win. You need 40 fellow Neanderthals with spears to have a chance. And still, if you've ever watched those horrifying films from the 1920s of people hunting lions, you know that the unlucky junior warriors in the middle of the line, they don't make it through the lion hunt alive, right? Like lock your shields any way you want, boys. Somebody's going down before all of your friends get the, anyway, that's not really an answer, but my answer would be like, wild boar, big wolf. Because the problem with fighting animals with swords is that swords are pointy, but the crossguard is down by your hand. So you just imagine like you thrust almost anything, and then you win, it's gonna die. But now it gets like some number of heartbeats to see if you get to die too. And so a lot of it would depend on armor. But I will say finally that if you absolutely trusted your martial arts skill, you can do the picador thing, which is the thrust down between the shoulder blades, which by the way, was the high money sprezzatura ultimate macho way of killing a lion from ancient Persia to like modern bullfighting, where you wait till the animal is literally close enough to eat you, and then stab behind its head, straight down past the spine and into the heart. And if you absolutely trust your skill, or you really want to impress the girl or boy who's watching, depending on your point of view, you can go for that. Human beings have done it. And then if you're going for that, there's almost no limit to the size you can take on with your sword. I think you can burn through a lot of heroes getting there.
I think so, yeah. Well, yeah, all the people who failed and got eaten. Yeah, and it's the 100th guy that managed to make it look really cool and effortless that inspires the next 100 idiots to go and have a go. So
Exactly. And that one guy, and I think you kind of captured this in The Coward. That one guy, he does that the one time, and then he dines out on it for the rest of his life. And when they're like, "Hey, we're fighting lions on Tuesday. You want to come?" He's like, "Oh, how? I have a standing hair appointment on Tuesdays, and I'd hate to give it up."
I'd really rather not. I've done my go. It's your turn now. It's a young man's game.
It's not that hard. Just get the sword in behind it.
Yeah, so easy. Anyone can do it. I did it. You have a go. Tell me how you get on. Yeah. Right. I think I've talked to you long enough. I've chewed your ear long enough. Artifact Space is out now. I'll leave links down below for all your socials and all the rest of it, and Writing Fighting and all that sort of stuff on Twitter, people to follow you. But thank you for talking to me this evening. And,
Stephen, a great pleasure. I hope I've kept you entertained and your audience.
Kept me insane. Forget the rest. I've had great fun. So
well, that's the best I can hope for.
Excellent. All right, guys, we'll see you next time. Good night.